All right, looks like live once again. A little bit of a delay for some reason. So, in this particular installment of Random Live, I'm going to talk about the health benefits of lengthening, what that is, how it differs from normal stretching, and how it can actually release things from the nervous system directly. Because just thinking about something cognitively or being aware of some aspect of something typically does not actually result in lengthening, which typically does not result in things actually being removed from the nervous system. So, this process of lengthening is intertwined and part of every legitimate internal arts kind of endeavor. But it's something that unfortunately most people don't know. They don't know what it is. They don't know how to access it, and it subsequently doesn't ever actually happen because you can see it in someone's body if they have it or not, and it's verifiable. It's an easily verifiable thing to know whether or not it's happening. And I think if there was one thing, one single thing that I wish more people knew, and that I wish mostly everyone could do, and even myself, if I could wish I could master one thing, it would be this particular quality. So typically, what people are familiar with in terms of stretching is not lengthening. There's many different types of stretching. There's many different tissue structures in the body that you can work with. So the first thing to understand is that what I'm talking about is not a technique. It's not a posture. It's not based on any kind of posture or putting your body in any particular kind of put your arms here, move your arms here, has nothing to do with any of those things. It's just a quality. It's an internal quality that is reflected in and expressed through how the mind and or the awareness and the body are interacting with themselves. That's the most important thing to understand. It is a quality, not really an action. It's not a posture. It has nothing to do with movements or putting your body in exactly right different kinds of ways. And I mention that because, especially as it relates to basically every internal art that I've seen, people are trying to find all these other physiological things and all these other actions and all these other techniques to try to like make it work and make it do the thing, when in reality it's about the qualities. And once you have the qualities, really what you do with it is almost secondary. How your body is structured just changes how that particular quality might express and affect the body. So that's the first and the most important thing to understand. And I guess actually another thing that I'll point out is that, just as a I could be wrong on this, but I think the overall engagement and viewership on this particular video will probably be a bit low, because what I noticed is pretty much every practical, useful oriented thing that I put out over the years tends to tends to get much lower engagement, because I think a lot of people are more in the research analysis phase of their pathology or whatever issue they're dealing with, more so than the actual wanting to do something about it phase. I could be completely wrong. Could be just my erroneous assessment, but based on just the data and the views and what people actually respond to, it seems that's actually a common thing. So we'll see if that ends up being true. So yeah, the health benefits of lengthening, understanding that is a quality, not a technique, not a posture, not really an action. And there's different kinds of stretching. And usually what people assume stretching is maybe like trying to make their body bend in a particular kind of way. Or if I just think about an example, I want to stretch, I don't know, I guess my shoulder here or whatever, or my tricep. It's like the idea of how people normally stretch is I want to take it to like the maximum range and then try to get it to go further. And then next time range and try to get it to go further. And that's what people typically associate at that as being stretching, which I guess that's one type of way, but that tends to not be very effective, and tends to not really produce the best results. And oftentimes it can be harmful for the body because you can actually weaken things in the body that need to be strong. And there's a whole thing that I won't go into in this video about all of the negative effects of stretching. And this is why people are debating whether or not it's actually functional or useful and is beneficial for people. And it's also why it's extremely common that a lot of long term yoga people end up injuring themselves needing hip replacements, knee replacements, basically end up with a lot of compression in their joints, and end up being hyperflaccid. So that's not really what I'm talking about here. Specifically, what I'm talking about is basically the process of opening and releasing your nerves directly, which then causes your body to open from the inside out. So it's really kind of a simple mechanism. If you think of how most things cause this kind of response in the nervous system, especially stress, especially any type of trauma, which is basically just stress that gets trapped in your system, more or less. Um, all of those things cause the nervous system directly to contract and then causes it to kind of stay contracted. But it's not a muscle, it's just literally the nerves and the nervous tissue or the fibers or whatever, which should be able to move and be mobile, but for some reason they're stuck. And then when that happens when that occurs as a long enough period of time, then the body starts to form around that and protect things around it. So you get tight muscles, you get all these other compensation patterns, and people think, oh, I just got to stretch the muscle, but the nerve never really get released. So basically, lengthening is not stretching. It is different from stretching because it's your ability to get the nervous system to actually lengthen and release the contraction wherever it might be in the body, which then causes your whole body to kind of like inflate and more or less just get more room inside of it. And I mean, I've seen videos where it's been demoed where a person's arm, they stick their arms out straight ahead like this or even like this, right? And through 90 seconds or only 60 seconds of lengthening, their arm is now 8 inches longer, extending out of their body. Why? Because the it's not the muscle got longer or anything like that. It's literally just removing the contraction from various parts of the nervous system in the body, which then causes the body to expand and basically literally lengthen outwards. So when we talk about stretching and different types of things within internal arts, it's more so lengthening. Stretching isn't necessarily the best word because because if you even think about that, if you look at, I don't know, qigong or tai chi postures, oftentimes people, they don't look like super pulled and drawn out, which you would normally associate with stretching. So you're like, how can it be stretching? Well, I mean, the reality is for 99% of people, it isn't, because it's more so quality. But it basically, because it's a different form of stretching. That's not the normal type that we associate. It's actually more so lengthening, which I can keep my skeleton stationary and be lengthening the body where my skeleton isn't moving away, but I'm still getting an intense stretch, which that confuses people. And it sounds weird because obviously it is weird because it's a different mechanic. But it's really more so how these things work. So basically getting back to lengthening, I think if there was one thing that I wish more people could do across a wider scale, it's this. If there was one thing that I think is the most healing, the most beneficial, the most useful thing, it is actually this quality, being able to change your awareness to such a degree that you create that kind of stretch all the way through the body so that basically your entire nervous system is like hanging off of your bones. That's how it feels in a way, and is stretching and lengthening outwards. And that is basically releasing stress, releasing trauma, and releasing whatever is causing the nervous system to contract and to bind, which could be, who knows, so many different things. So that's really what the end goal is in the process and the quality that I think anyone interested in healing is looking for. But I've never really seen it or found it in anything other than very small amount of people who did internal arts and were actually good and knew what they were doing. And, this is coming from someone who tried like every healing kind of thing under the sun, whether it's different plant medicines or drugs or supplements or bodywork modalities or therapies and so many different things right over the course of my life. And then really realizing that lengthening and that process of genuine release and letting go is actually what all of these things were trying to approximate, but never actually did. And I think, unfortunately and sadly, what most people are doing in modern times is basically underlying contraction and tension in their nervous system manifesting as tense, contractive patterns, and then just reinforcing that back in, but then thinking it's the opposite. So, whether that's, I don't know, plant medicines and doing all these journeys and you have all these visual experiences and I see things in so many different ways now, which of course can be useful. Obviously, I'm not saying that there's no value there, because obviously having a different perspective and zooming out of things and maybe being able to look at things from outside of yourself can be, maybe that's what someone needs, of course. The problem is that it doesn't typically actually lengthen the nerves, which is an obvious physiological thing that you can literally see in the body, and literally it's a real thing. It's not like a cognitive abstract thing. It's visibly verifiable and tangible in the body. And when it actually occurs, it tends to actually stay. Meaning, like, my flexibility and my mobility is just constantly improving, even though I don't actually do any stretching or mobility stuff. It's just from being able to release the nerves and do the process of lengthening. My body just naturally opens and feels super loose, and the joints get more space, and everything just kind of like pops out and pops open. And my body feels very soft and open and mobile, closer to closer to the state that it was in when I was a child. Which the only reason we are not in that state that we were when we were a child is because of the opposite of lengthening, which is contraction. So how this relates to psychological things is people develop all these memories and all this identity, right? And all this emotional stuff and all these beliefs and preferences and biases, and develop these strong emotional investments in these things. And then the benefit is, I feel like I have a sense of strength, but the perceived sense of strength is just contraction, and is just usually usually built up stress and defense mechanisms. That's basically all that it is. It's not necessarily a spontaneous, adaptive, fluid, open sort of sense of self. It's usually something that can only exist in a small sense of parameters. And then what happens over time is that, and maybe you've noticed this, what you actually experience from life starts to get less and less. You feel less, you notice less, your overall emotional and feeling spectrum gets smaller, and you need more things to be entertained by. Like, as an example, you think of a child, you just give them a stick, they can play with this. Or, I mean, maybe not anymore, but back in the day, you could just tell kids to go outside and they would find something to do to keep themselves entertained in a yard, or like a pile of leaves for like hours, just with like leaves or like some rocks. Whereas adults, we can't do that anymore. We need all this other complicated stimulation. So what happens is two things. Like, this is just natural. For one, it's just part of being an adult and getting older and really going through that contracted process. But then now the error that I think people have made is trying to go, well, you should feel more and do your feelings more and be into your feelings and be spontaneous and be more like a child in all these ways, which is, there's definitely truth to it, but it's also kind of not that accurate, because you're an adult. Like, trying to live your life as a child but you're an adult, that just will never work, which is, we can see the negative repercussions of that. What they're trying to approximate is what I'm talking about, is the process of lengthening. Because if your nervous system is not really contracted anymore, then you naturally automatically have a wider experience of life, not because you're listening to your whims or your flight of fancy or indulging your feelings or being stupid, or like a child. I mean, because kids are kind of stupid. What I mean is, where I live, I see kids all the time. They're running around and they just trip and fall for no reason, or like they just will be walking and they just fall over for no reason. Like, or there's just like a very simple thing in front of them and they just run into it. Like, that's what I mean. Like, they're kind of stupid. So, like, as an adult, you obviously don't want to live your life in that way. So that's why, following your feelings and whims and flights of fantasies and being like, "Oh my god, everything's so new all the time." Like, that's not really what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is if you actually get the contraction and the contraction out of your nerves and that lengthening process going, you retain all of the good parts of being an actual adult, but it's not based on just constantly um, validating your emotional programming or whatever small sense of identity. It's actually there's more openness and fluidity naturally because that's the inherent quality of your nervous system. It's nothing you have to do. There's no process. It's nothing. It's just an inherent quality. It's like I don't have to do anything to be 5'9" or 10, whatever I am. It's just an inherent quality. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to go to a workshop. I don't have to do affirmations. It's inherent and it's there, done. So what I mentioned that is people try to approximate these things, but they just end up creating another hamster wheel that doesn't actually produce the results. So what everyone's actually looking for is basically what I'm talking about here, which is the actual ability for your nervous system and your nerves to actually lengthen, which is to remove the contraction. Because what people think they should do is, okay, so I imagine my memory in my life is this big file folder, and I have to just go through and like organize and process every file that's in the folder. And if I can just process enough files and put them in the right place and give them a grade and do all these things, then I'll eventually reach the end of the file folder and I'll feel good or I'll feel better or I'll be healed or I'll achieve something. But what happens is all they do is they get good at going through the file folder because the process of going through the file folder isn't the process of actual lengthening. It's just going through the file folder. And they get really good at talking about it, at analyzing it, about um, putting in all these different contexts and all these different schemas and criterias, but still the results never manifest. And just got to do more file sorting. So, more plant medicines, more retreats, more journeys, more initiations, more transmissions, more downloads, more. When in actuality, that's just more stress, tension, and anxiety. But you're telling yourself that the opposite is actually occurring. So the process of having the actual quality of getting your your awareness to interface with your nervous system to consciously and directly release the contraction is not found in basically anything that people are doing. And to be explicitly clear, what actually heals the body and changes the nervous system is, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's basically only removing the actual tangible contraction from that thing. Because, for example, if you think of a bad event and it's triggering or bothering or has any charge, your nerves tend to go like contract in some way or kind of like, "Eh." But if you thought of that same event and your nerves just went, then we could say that had basically no effect on you. So rather than going through every event, every memory, everything, da 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 da, doing all this complicated mental thing, if you just actually go to the nervous system directly, initiate lengthening, then a lot of the other stuff takes care of itself because all of that charge, all of that contraction is no longer there. So that means all that stuff just doesn't bother you anymore and you don't notice it without you having to do all of this other work. So at least for me, when I first heard about this and was introduced to it, I just realized like, oh, this is kind of what I've been looking for. And I'll give you an illustration for what I mean. Let's say let's say your life or your problems or whatever it is you're trying to sort out is like a train with like an engine on the front, and then it has all these cars of junk and baggage attached to it, right? And let's say you have 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000 different cars attached to the engine, and you want the engine to just be able to detach from all the cars and be able to just go and do its thing automatically, right? So there's many different ways you could do that. Um, you could, I will say, what people commonly do is go to the back, and instead of detaching the last one, they just add more, and then they go back to that one and they add more. I feel like that's kind of what the common healing approach is, which is not putting anyone down. It's just an obvious outcome, meaning if you're already really contracted and stressed, that's kind of normal. That's your normal like frame of reference form of stimulation. So then the only thing that's going to be appealing to you is something that moves that. If it doesn't move it at all, it's not appealing because it doesn't do anything for you. So that's why people tend to already just crave more of what is going to probably take them in the opposite direction. So that's the first option. But then let's say someone gets a little more pragmatic and they find something that kind of sort of maybe sort of works. So they just start off at the back and just start detaching the carts or whatever from the back. Okay, but let's say there's millions of them. That's going to obviously take a really long time. Or what if you could just go all the way to the front, and then if you find the first car that's attached to the engine and you just detach that car from the engine, now you just detached all of them. So now the engine can just drive away. So to me, that's more personally what I'm interested in, even though I've spent a lot of my life doing the other things. So I can speak from experience that maybe it's not the most efficient methodology. And I remember when I was in college in philosophy classes, I tried to present that a metaphor or analogy, and people were just looking at me like, granted, this was like Western philosophy. And my point, I was just trying to point out how inefficient and masturbatory that their endeavor was, which is obviously maybe why they didn't get the metaphor. But my point is, I think the process of lengthening and being able to actually develop that quality is a little closer to just detaching all of the stuff from the engine so the engine can pull away rather than going whatever, 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 which is, again, normally what people are doing. So hopefully that makes sense and that is useful and is at least plants the seed or maybe reorients perception in a different direction, because if no one ever pointed it out to you, you might never know about it. And if you didn't know it was even an option, then you would never know about it. So sometimes that's the most important thing, to actually know that it is actually a possible thing. And I think this is what actually people are looking for, but is not really commonly available. Like I said, I looked for many, many years and only found it within a small handful of people that were actually skilled in internal arts. And then some, uh, manual therapy, kind of osteopathic body workers know about it as well. But they're able to do it a little more uh, localized. Whereas what I'm talking about is system wide. Sure, you can do localized, but more system wide, the entire nervous system from the head all the way through the body, out through the limbs, basically lengthening and literally getting longer. So the actual body just opens up and kind of deflates so that you don't go around looking like you're in a straitjacket. Because and I'll just do this, I'll just leave you with this as a thought experiment. With this idea in mind, start looking at your own body. And then when you're out in the world, look at other people's bodies. I see a lot of people in their shoulders are like this, or they're just scrunched into their body, or their chest is like hunched and their spine is just like, and their hips are all jammed up into their pelvis, and their whole body is just, I mean, that's not a good thing. Their quality of life is probably not very high, let's just say. And I'll be mean for a second and I'll talk about Eckhart Tolle or Eckhart Tolle. For some reason, people think he's some kind of like spiritual teacher. I don't know why. I don't understand it. So I recently saw a video of him walking around and like making tea, and his posture and his actual structure, like the way his body actually was extremely bothersome. Um, and I'm thinking to myself, how do people not see this? Well, I understand how they don't see it because they don't understand these different mechanisms within the body. But basically, his body was so contracted and so like he looked like Quasimodo from. I mean, if you look up Quasimodo, that was his posture, like a hunchback, like little gremlin gnome sort of thing. And I'm thinking, like, people revere this person who literally just tells people to be calm and try to be calm and pay attention. And that's somehow a profound thing in our world. Which then, if that level and the degree of teaching is profound to people, what does that say about them? Like, it's like if you taught a room full of educated adults that 1 + 1 = 2 and they were blown away, that wouldn't be the greatest reflection on their overall functioning as adults. If you told, a 5-year-old or 6-year-old that 1 + 1 = 2 and they thought it was amazing, then sure, that makes sense. So I realize that's mean or whatever, but my point is, if his nervous system was actually open and his nervous system was actually expanded, then it would be open and expanded naturally and effortlessly without effort or tension or struggle or strife. Basically, anytime that his awareness would interact with his body, it would produce that result because that would be the quality of the awareness that was passed back into his body. But that obviously doesn't occur, hasn't occurred, because you can see it in his body, which means his mind is probably just dull and sleepy. Because if you look at his body, it is just dull, contracted, and sleepy. So it's just kind of an illustration, sort of, to what I mean. Because for me, for example, if I train and I put my awareness in my body, then basically this is what starts to happen. That's my awareness going into my body. Now it's just back into my head with me talking. So as soon as my awareness goes in, all my tissues and my nervous system starts going and expanding and stretching and opening, expanding and stretching and opening and moving and pushing out. And if you touch it, it's very taut and hard, not hard, but it would feel like I was lifting a weight or something as all of the expansion of the tissue off of the bone. But that's just because my awareness goes into the body, and then the quality of the awareness is reflected in the body, and then that's the effect, which then tells me that my awareness is not super contracted. Obviously, there's infinite room for growth and progress there, but it's just at least some clear physiological indicator that what I think or believe is happening is actually happening. Because if I do it, I can see it and like, oh, that's happening. And then that effect lasts to meaning after I do that for a sustained period of time, afterwards, I'm like, oh, yeah, way more open, loose, flexible, open, strong. I'm sweating as my blood is moving, my fluids are moving, and I just feel healthier. Or maybe now I do that and like all this mucus is coming out and my body's pushing out stuff, or different pathogens come out or whatever. Like basically what I think or believe is happening is actually proven and made manifest tangibly in the physical world as reflected in the physical body. So I think that degree of realness is not found in a lot of things. And this is what informs much of the videos and the content that I make, is these principles that I've been talking about in this video, because you can see it. It's obvious, it's real, it's tangible, and is not based in visualization or hope or faith, or I guess a degree of faith in the method to at least apply it enough to actually get a result. But it's not really based in believing in something like that. It's not based in taking drugs or being hopped up on stimulants, or it's not really based on anything other than the exact processes and mechanisms, which is why I tend to speak a bit low of so many of the common things that people are doing, because it's just typically based in actions and techniques and doing, which, if you want to break this down further, the cause of stress and tension and that eventually manifest as disease patterns is usually a form of intention and a form of action or doing. It's almost like kind of a technique. Like if you think about, if you have, let's say, neck pain, basically you have neck pain because you're applying the technique of probably contracting your shoulders into your body. Just as an example, it could manifest for many reasons, but every day your body is applying the technique of, like, even when I just pulled my shoulders and my scapula into my body, I felt pressure and tension go into my neck, actually. So what I mean is, people are applying that technique into their body every day. Or people that, like myself, that were chronically angry for many years, I was just applying that technique, that intention, into my body every day, and that was just became a default thing. So then what happens is, you do that enough times, your body just gets better at doing it. So what I mean is, everything that people are doing is usually based on some kind of technique, some kind of doing, some kind of action. But the vast majority of the time, that's the exact mechanics that are causing the problem in the first place. So it probably will not lead to the resolution or relief of the thing that they are trying to get rid of. So that's another component to what I'm talking about here, and why I'm typically not so much a fan of things, uh, solely for the reason that it typically doesn't produce good results and just leads people down the wrong direction, which I think people kind of know, but they're using the surrogate of expanding their mind as, or releasing their mind, or being expansive in their consciousness, as the surrogate for what actually should tangibly, viscerally, really be occurring in their physiology. But in reality, their mind isn't expansive. Their consciousness isn't expansive. Their awareness isn't expansive. It isn't open. It isn't expanded in any way, shape, or form. It's just in a different form of or a different mode of stimulation that feels new and cool and novel. Because if their mind and their awareness was actually expanded, was actually released, was actually open, that will be made manifest throughout their entire nervous system, which would completely change the functioning of their physiology, and be made manifest in how their body actually looks and feels and moves. So what I mean is, if that profoundly and strongly occurs, then maybe something useful is occurring. But I think for most people, for most of the time, it's purely an abstract thing, which is based in novelty and stimulation seeking. And that's just kind of based on what I've seen over however many years that I've been in this world. So anyways, just to recap, I've been talking about the healing benefits of lengthening, what lengthening even is. It's a quality, not a technique, not a posture. It's not based in movements. It's not based in really an action. It's different than actual stretching. And what most people are doing as stretching typically doesn't lead to lengthening. Maybe their muscle fibers might kind of lengthen sort of over time, but typically not. Usually that just what they're experiencing is more hyperflaccidity in their system that then feels loose, but it's just flaccid, which is not the same. So the process of lengthening is actually learning to release and lengthen the nervous system directly, which then basically gives someone the ability to directly interface with their nervous system and directly release contraction from the physical nerves. So whether that's stress or trauma or whatever, basically allows that to be removed from the body without all of the other mental gymnastics that people are typically doing and typically think they have to do, because the usual mode of thinking is like looking at the process as this big file folder and have to go through every file and somehow be aware of it and process it, whatever that even means. And, you know, emotionally do whatever or have an emotional catharsis. And then that will, if I just sort through enough, then I'll experience some benefits. But usually what happens is people just get good at sorting through the files, or they get good at having emotional reactions. Because from what I've observed over the last 15, 20 years, people that take that belief and that mode, they just feel more stuff. They get more sensitive. They get more almost kind of weaker in a way. Meaning when I think of strength, like in resiliency, basically like less stuff would bother you. You wouldn't be like more emotional and think you're getting stronger. Like you would think the opposite. Like, oh, I don't really notice that stuff anymore. Yeah, I don't feel stressed, or yeah, I don't feel whatever. I just feel good. I feel calm. I feel strong. But I see most people, they feel more things. They get more emotional. They get more into it, and then they think that's progress. When I guess it might feel that way because you're feeling more, but you're just getting better at at feeling more stuff, which doesn't actually move or release things from your nervous system. It just trains your nervous system to get better at emotional feeling reactions, which I guess if you want to be an artist or something of that nature, then okay, that might be useful. But in terms of actually healing, that doesn't, it's not healing. That's just a layer of stress and tension with a new technique laid on top of it. That's basically all that it is. But that's really where people go in the healing world, either through their sexuality or through their intellect, through, developing all these new schemas and all this new kind of doublespeak and criteria and analytical complexities, or they go to their emotions and think having crying and catharsis or being more emotional is somehow going to heal them. But in actuality, it typically doesn't. Sure, it might be useful, it might be helpful to, gain awareness and understand your story, understand your life experience. Of course, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying in terms of relating to the the actual process of lengthening, meaning the reason why you feel uncomfortable, the reason why you feel stressed. Basically, the reason why people are doing that stuff at all is because their nervous system is like this, either globally or locally, meaning the whole quality of their nervous system and their physiology is like this, or maybe they have certain parts that are like this. That's why they're doing it, because that's what makes them feel bad. So wouldn't it make sense to go directly to the thing that's making them feel bad and make it go, ah, and then now that's like, oh, I globally feel better. So then you don't have to worry about all that other stuff. All the situations that were triggering now all of a sudden are just neutral. All the things that you thought you had to do and develop are just there automatically. Like I gotta develop this thing and that skill and this skill and that skill and process this, all this complexity. It's like, or just change the actual underlying quality of your nervous system. And then when you're confronted with that situation, you'll feel basically like just fine. So then you can have your actions reflect that sense of fineness. But what happens is people feel like this, and their natural response is to want to be like this, which is going to be dysfunctional. So then they have to learn this coping mechanism. Oh, I have to have better boundaries. I can't be a people pleaser. I have to learn to assert myself, or I can't be a whatever, fill in the blank. So then I have to do something so that I don't be this thing, which I actually am. I have to try to have a technique to be something different than what I am. And that's going to take a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of energy and take years. And it's the quote unquote the work. But in actuality, this is still the underlying quality. So you have this underlying quality, and then you have all these techniques and mental analysis on top of it, which is probably just going to create more of this. But then you're telling yourself, oh, in these situations, I was able to practice this technique. So that means I'm doing the work. So that means I'm doing better. And that means I'm healing. That means I'm progressing. That means I'm a better person now. And all these other self image induced things which occur, but the reality is this is still the underlying pattern. So you actually haven't changed. Sure, you maybe got more proficient or adept at a technique, but you haven't actually changed. You got more efficient at a technique, which that technique is fundamentally based on lying and deceiving yourself and deceiving other people, which because if this is the underlying quality in your nerves, but you're pretending and telling people through a technique that this is your underlying quality, that's a lie. That's not true. That's a conflict. That's deceit. But then you're caught up in thinking that it's that way. So then now you're created a new layer of conflict, which is going to be like this. So I think unfortunately, that's where a lot of the modern world is at, and a lot of people are at, which is why they're so reliant on so many of these things. And then I think this is probably also why people are so confused that I just don't care about any of that stuff. It's like typically at all. Sure, it can be useful as a framework. Like, sure, there can be benefits and some useful things to come out of it, of course. But it just doesn't actually produce the results that people think. So, and that's something that really started to confuse me early on, and probably why I have so many videos offending so many like spiritual people back in the day. Also, too, part of it was my languaging and my delivery, which am working on changing that a little bit. But also, too, I noticed the reason why I was oftentimes sharp because I was annoyed, because I was annoyed by the deceit or the conflict. Whereas now it's like, it is what it is. It's fine. So I can just be chill about it, and it makes literally no difference. How did that shift and change occur? Not necessarily really from a technique, more so just changing the underlying quality. So I don't know. I'm just kind of explaining the same thing in a lot of different ways at this point, just trying to drive the point home. And hopefully it will make sense and be useful, and some part of it will click. So yeah, but anyways, I've been on here for this long and no one's really engaging in the chat. So I'm probably going to just dip off now because I've already repeated this multiple times. So hopefully this makes sense. Hopefully it's been useful and beneficial, because this is, I think, the actual mechanic, the actual quality that really we're all looking for. And I think it's the most important thing, especially as the modern world gets more crazy and contractive with social media and technology. This is going to be one of the most useful and beneficial and necessary skills for absolutely even surviving. So anyways, I thought it was really useful and helpful, and for me, and it has been, it's been nothing short of life-changing, um, to where a bunch of stuff that used to bother me, I just don't even remember. I didn't have to do anything to get rid of it or process it. It just was gone. Um, so yeah, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching, and I will talk to you soon.